Our today's topic is Pteridophytes structure from evolutionary viewpoint, and in this class we'll be discussing about stele evolution in pteridophytes. Pteridophytes are considered as the first terrestrial vascular plants, showing the presence of the vascular tissues, xylem and phloem. Xylem and phloem are evolutionary very important structures, as these tissues transport food and water and also allowing pteridophytes to grow taller than their ancestors. This stele is a Greek word meaning pillar or column. Stele is defined as the central vascular cylinder with or without pith. Endodermis is the boundary between the cortex and the stele. This central cylinder or core of vascular tissues consisting of xylem, phloem, pericycle and sometimes medullary rays and pith is technically called the stele. Concept of the stele as the fundamental unit of vascular system was given by Tieghem and Douliot in 1886, who proposed and developed stellar theory. Now, stele in pteridophytes can be differentiated into two major groups, protostele and siphonostele. Protostele is the most simplest and primitive type of stele. In protostele, the vascular bundle is a concentric solid mass and the central core of xylem, you can see here, central core of xylem is surrounded by a layer of phloem and finally surrounded by a layer of pericycle. Siphonostele, modulated protostele is called siphonostele. So first of all, protostele. Protostele is the most primitive and simplest type of stele, as I already told you. So in protostele, the solid mass means and the central core of xylem is surrounded by a layer of phloem. The protostele exists as Haplostele, Actinostele, Plactostele, mixed protostele, and mixed protostele with pith. Haplostele is the most primitive type of stele, and in this, the xylem forms a solid, smooth, and spherical central core. This is xylem, which is surrounded by continuous concentric layer of phloem. Example of pteridophytes in which haplostele can be found are means haplostele can be found in fossil genera as well as in living genera. In fossil genera, for example, Rhynia, Horneophyton, and living genera examples are Selaginella, kraussiana, and selaginoides. Next is Actinostele. This is the modification of the haplostele and somewhat more advanced in having the central xylem core with radiating ribs. You can see here, this is actinostele. So here xylem core with radiating ribs, and phloem is not concentric but present in between the radiating ribs of the xylem. You can see here, phloem is present as the groups, means between the radiating ribs of the xylem. This is phloem here. So example is xylotom. Next is Lactostele, means because of the breaking of the xylem mass into different forms, actinostele shows some variations. For example, Plactostele, mixed protostele with pith. So Plactostele, just look at this diagram. Here, in the stem of some species, for example, in Lycopodium, the solid core of xylem gets broken in a number of plates. Plates like lobes more or less laying parallel to one another. You can see here. And phloem alternates with xylem plates. These are phloem plates which are light in color. So, example is Lycopodium. Next is mixed protostele. Just look at this third diagram. In this type, masses of the xylem and phloem are uniformly distributed. Means scattered groups of xylem are embedded in the ground tissues of the phloem. So these are the groups of xylem which are embedded in the ground tissues of the phloem. Example of mixed protostele is Lycopodium syrinum. Next is mixed protostele with pith. Just look at this diagram. Mixed protostele with pith. In the center, there is parenchyma cells associated along with the tracheids. For example, in Hymenophyllum. So it may be derived from transformation of the tracheids into parenchyma and maybe the first step in the formation of pith. So such type of protostele is termed as mixed protostele with pith. Next is siphonostele. Modulated protostele is called siphonostele. I can see here pith. So presence of pith. So it is the characteristic of Phelicophyta division of pteridophytes. This is the modification of protostele. During the development of siphonostele, the central core of xylem is replaced by parenchymatous cells so that definite pith is formed, which is surrounded by xylem appears in the center. Here, pith. So on the basis of the branch and leaf gap, siphonostele can be distinguished into two types, mainly ectoploic siphonostele and amphiploic siphonostele. Just look at this first diagram. Ectoploic siphonostele. Here the pith is surrounded by concentric xylem. Here this is pith surrounded by concentric xylem, and next to the xylem is the concentric phloem cylinder. It means phloem is restricted only on the external side of the xylem. Example, osmunda. Then another type of the siphonostele is amphiploic siphonostele. Just look at this second diagram. In amphiploic siphonostele, pith is surrounded by vascular tissues. Here, this is pith. Concentric inner phloem cylinder surrounds the central pith. Next to the concentric xylem cylinder, which is immediately surrounded by outer phloem cylinder. It means phloem is present both sides of the xylem, right? This is pith and xylem, phloem. Here in the center, dark layer xylem and again phloem. So it means xylem cylinder is surrounded by, on both the sides surrounded by phloem. Example is Marsilia rhizome. Then on the basis of branch and leaf gaps. Leaf gaps are? Leaf gap means when stele of the stem was connected with that of the leaf by a vascular connection. This is known as leaf trace. So here, other modification of siphonostele means on the basis of branch and leaf gap. This siphonostele can be distinguished into two types: cladosiphonic siphonostele and phyllosyphonic siphonostele. Cladosiphonic siphonostele means when no leaf gap are present. Example, Selaginella. In the case of siphonostele, leaf and branch gap are present. Next is selenostele. If siphonostele perforated at the place or places to the origin of the leaf trace, such a condition is known as solenostele. Solenostele may be ectoploic solenostele or amphiploic solenostele. Ectoploic, just look at this first diagram. Ectoploic solenostele, this type of solenostele derived from the ectoploic siphonostele. Here the phloem is present only uh, one side of the xylem. On the here you can see this is xylem and surrounded by phloem, and phloem is present only one side of the xylem. In the case of, just look at the second diagram, amphiploic solenostele, this type of solenostele derived from the amphiploic siphonostele. So, in this case, the phloem is present on both the sides of the xylem. Then, another type of the stele, dictyostele, just look at this third diagram. It is in the more advanced siphonostele of Pteropsida. The successive gaps may overlap each other. In some cases, means in the case of Pteropsida, the successive gaps may overlap each other. So, in dictyostele, so siphonosteles with overlapping gaps is called dictyostele. In this case, the solenostele broken into network of separate, you can see here, broken into network of separate vascular strands due to crowded leaf gaps. These are the leaf gaps. So in such cases, each separate vascular strand is known as meristele. Each meristele is of a protostelic type, and the dictyostele is a ring of many meristele. Then eustele, next is eustele. This is there is one more modification of siphonostele. This is known as eustele. Here the stele is split into distinct collateral vascular bundles. You can see here this is eustele, and here the vascular system consists of a ring of collateral or bicollateral vascular bundles situated on the periphery of the pith. This is pith. So uh, another type of the stele is dactostele. In rectostele, the vascular bundle is scattered and it occurs into monocotyledons only. We can see here scattered vascular strands, vascular bundles. This stele is tetrastoles. Then polycyclic stele, another type of the stele. When the vascular tissue present in the form of two or more concentric slender, such stele is called polycyclic stele. Then polystele. Sometimes more than one stele is present in the axis of some pteridophytes. Such condition is called polysteles, and such steles shows polystelic condition. Examples: Selaginella. Selaginella have polystelic condition. Then next is evolutionary sequence, means summary, whatever we have studied. It is now generally clear that simplest type of the stele is protostele. So it is fundamental type for the vascular plant in general and in pteridophytes in general, and all the other type of the stele have been derived from it in the course of evolutionary specialization. As far as known, all pteridophytes in the initial stage start with protostelic stem. When the shoot grows accompanying an increase in size, there is internal differentiation of the stele, and this first step in the appearance of parenchyma scattered in the xylem, and finally a central parenchymatous medulla or pith is developed in the protostele, and such type of the stele is called siphonostele. And in the simplest form of the siphonostele have no leaf cap in Selaginella, for example, and known as cladosiphonic siphonostele, in contrast with the polysiphonic condition with leaf caps. So siphonostele, which is perforated by scattered leaf cap, are known as solenostele, and the siphonostele with more overlapping gap is known as dictyostele. Thank you.